I'm here with Elias Ortega. He's the president and the professor at the Meadville Lombard Theological School. Welcome, Elias. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, Luis. Such a pleasure.
Thanks, Elias. What we're going to talk about today is about the role of nonprofit leadership. So in the donor participation project, we talk a lot about how you can get more people to involved and giving and participating, and how you can create a more inclusive environment to make people feel welcome. But I feel like we don't always talk a lot about what the role of leadership is in creating that environment, not necessarily doing all the work, but creating that environment. And Elias here has, from what I've learned from you, you're kind of, I would say, 2 or 3 steps ahead in how you're approaching this type of work. So we look forward to learning a lot from you today.
Okay.
Yes, thanks a lot. Would you like to introduce yourself, or talk about your history in Meadville or something like that?
Sure. So absolutely. So before coming to Meadville, I should say that before coming to Meadville, I was working at Youre Theological School, and one of the things that I was fortunate to be able to do there is to develop a portfolio that allowed me to do community engagement. Right, so that meant that I was have the ability to take my classes into the community to work with nonprofit organizations in a particular question or topic that they were interested in. What that allowed me to do, right, was one, provide opportunity, like hands-on opportunity for my students to learn about not only community organizations, right, but learned about particular social issues of concerns to them in connection to a community organization to make an impact. And what that did de facto in the community was to create kind of amplify the staff, right, for folks to be able to do. Oftentimes, my classes did research for organizations, right, or help to create grant proposals and the like, and encourage them to sex other organizations. So I already came in the mentality of into doing this leadership work that my work is really communal, right, and I partner with folks, I bring folks together, and thinking how can we have a collaborative impact of the work that we do. So I started in Meadville Lombard in 2019. The summer of 2019, so a few months before the pandemic, and of course for us that was a big shift. I should also say that part of the conversation around theological schools in higher ed is that there are very few leaders of color and very few young leaders of color. Right, so I'm coming as a kind of a Afro-Latino, younger, cis-presenting queer man into a space of leadership at a time of big transition. Right, and one of the things that is happening in theological schools, I think, and this can be, I think, amplified in higher ed in general and some nonprofits, is that there is a switch in what is the leader. What does the leader do? And we're moving, because of the impact of technology and digital media, we're starting to figure out how to become both, right, effective in kind of, let's say, in the office leadership work, but also effective in kind of creating social media presence. Right, and being kind of creating this public persona of both that I am an administrator, I am a scholar, but I also have a public presence in the larger world, and that entails connecting with social media and podcasts and writing in different means. One of the biggest lessons, I think, for me and my staff has been, as we start developing a social media strategy, is that we have different followers in different channels for different reasons. And that means that we have to kind of desegregate our conversation and communications depending on the audience that we're reaching. So for the school, our alums tend to follow us in Facebook, right? So we know that. Congregations and other nonprofits follow us in Instagram. And then Twitter is just its own different beast, right? By and large. And professionally speaking, then LinkedIn will be the place that I can do some of the work. So of course, that means how do we create communications that we can scaffold to move from one context to another that is unique, that is discreet, and that is effective. So I think we are in the exploration process of how do we start then scaffolding a lot of our communications and engagement to create all that content. And I also have a very small staff, right? One communication person, the director of development, and myself, right? So we're trying to put all these pieces together. And that means that whatever we do, we have to be able to mobilize it with creativity, right? In different contexts for different audiences. So I think as a leader, that's one of the projects, right, that has kind of really consumed the work that I've been doing over the last 2.5 years or 20 months. The other piece that I've been really intrigued by is creating community. Like, how do we engage our folks? Not only, but I mean my folks, I mean our staff, create cohesiveness right within our staff in a moment in which we have to work remotely, but also in our larger community that is used to gathering for particular events that now we cannot do face to face. And it's been a moment of exploration. We have some successes and also some events that have not gone as well as we have hoped to. And some of them related, the successes I would say for us has been connected to folks really want to be in touch, right, with the school and finding out the initiatives, really figuring out how to support our students. And folks have been really generous with us in ways that we have not even imagined. And some of the challenges have been really with the exhaustion, right, of being in front of the screen all the time. And we planned one event, and we had a really, in the books, a possible high turnout, and then the weather turned for the best. It was a nice sunny afternoon, so we knew.
Oh no, horrible!
Exactly. We had 20% of those who registered, right, to come, a little bit less, and they all said the same thing. They reached out to us as the weather is just way too nice. We're going out.
Elias, you've touched on so many critical points, and I want to kind of say again that from what I've seen in nonprofit leadership, you're definitely ahead of the curve. I put the example of all the unrest that we've had in the last 12 months and how many nonprofit leaders just were silent on social media. And then you had for-profit, goodness, even the CEO of Goldman Sachs making these statements, that were really value-driven. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. And before going into the specifics, and you mentioned the staffing and all of that, two questions, like what positive things have you seen come out of this activity where you're presenting a public persona that's driven by your values and your organization's values, and what problems or what has there been a negative part? So the positive and the negative of this.
Yeah, I think the positive, and I'm thinking, for folks that I am kind of working in a theological school that leans towards the left, very progressive, multi-religious, pluralistic. We have this odd combination of bringing folks who are kind of secular atheists, interested in values-driven conversation, and folks who are more spiritual seekers into one conversation. And I think for that reason, what is expected, right, from my position is to be able to kind of articulate positions in matters of social justice, right? And I would say there's something that drives us together or join us together would be social justice conversations. And in our current time, I think there's a lot of kind of heat around some conversations and not a lot of light. So I would say part of the challenge for me has been, how do you start a particular conversation and moderate aspects of it, understanding that it can go haywire very quickly, and you may not have the opportunity to moderate. And I think particularly in a country, so I'm thinking recently I made a post last week, right? And it have been shared over 1,000 times, and I lost track of some of the comments. And part of it is connected to a graphic that was published in the 1800s about, and is titled Southern Chivalry, and is a kind of white man shooting a black baby with the caption, "If I haven't killed you, right, you will grow to rule me," right?
So was this on LinkedIn? Let me look for the link while
it's in Facebook. Sorry, it's in my Meadville President Facebook.
Okay, I'll try to post the link. But yeah, okay. Yeah. So how did that go? I can only imagine.
So this is connected to the Rittenhouse case, right? And I think part of the challenge for folks, I think, is that they immediately saw this as just kind of racial baiting, right? This is just a conversation around the Rittenhouse case didn't have anything to do with race, right? And I think that the challenge is, how do you help folks in the United States understand, right, that yes, this case have to do with race in particular ways. And one of the ways that I try to articulate to folks is, in our context, there are some ways in which how we're talking about the victims, right, who were murdered, who as white disposable folks, right? These are white criminals. They have records, etc. The only justice they deserve, right, is to be murdered, right? And it's okay. Justice was served because of these reasons. And it's like, well, this is interesting, right? Because that logic itself has a long racialized logic, right, in which some population are deemed disposable if they are too connected, right, to blackness, or they're seen as less than what the average white middle class would look like. But that requires a larger context for folks to kind of understand. So these are, white men with criminal records, in a place of black unrest, protesting, right? So they become then disposable in a system that is racialized in particular ways. So to be able to work through that requires some time, right? And also go to the historical background, right? We can talk about W.B. Du Bois' Black Reconstruction. We can talk about Ida B. Wells, Southern Horrors, and we have to put it in context. But some folks don't go into that kind of more systemic pieces. They want to go into something really, really short and small. And there's, given my role, I can moderate some conversations, others, right, and I can't. And I think I didn't do it in this post, but in other conversations, I have taken the position to say, well, the conversations is closed now, right, because this is a bit unruly, right, and we cannot kind of engage in all these conversations. And I don't have, myself, right, I cannot spend hours doing this conversation. So, I think what I'm learning then for the future, right, as this keep evolving is really there will be times in which we have to provide a bit of a larger context, right, of what things are about and not about, and then create seemingly ongoing context. Like, looking back, one of the things that I wish I would have done is added a segment or two, right, explaining some of the racial history and why I think this, either in writing or as a live content, right, to kind of push it along to continue the conversation. But I think that as a leader, right, this is something that I'm finding out to be more connected to the own work that I do in development and recruitment, is to start being a more social media speaking kind of president, in showing myself taking positions that are also connected to the values that the school upholds. I should also say that one of the things that I can do this, right, with freedom, is that my board and I had this conversation when I started, right, and the board made a resolution, right, to support my leadership in my position in social justice causes, right, and that means that there's moments in which things that I feel, right, and we discern that we need to have a conversation prior to me being public about a topic, right, we will do that. And there's also moments in which, right, if I'm in line, right, with the values of the school, then I can speak publicly, right, without kind of, I would say, censoring myself, right, in particular ways. And that's helpful.
This is fascinating, because where I see lots of nonprofits stumble in this, I would almost say, new way of communicating, is in the post publishing conversation. Right, so they'll be okay with, yes, let's post more, let's be maybe more human, let's be more authentic, let's be more raw, or whatever the word is. But then you start seeing the comments, and that's when things really shut down. Right? Oh, no, we need to delete the post, or we need to close that, and that sends a message in and of itself, right? And as you say, it poses logistical challenges as well, who moderates it, and all of that. So how are you trying to approach that dilemma of, well, yes, we need to communicate more, we need to be like more with our community instead of away from our community, but I still need to do the office leadership, I still need to run the school, and our staff is naturally limited, and there will be positive effects from all of this. It's just going to take a little bit. How have you tried to balance all of that?
Yes. I need to give a shout out to Matthew from Intrust Magazine. He's the editor of the magazine, and he is a brilliant person. He's been, in some ways, really both an informal mentor, right, of sorts, in helping me think through, right, what does a good communication plan look like, because it is a lot of work, right, and he keep pushing me back and say, like, remember, your staff is small, so what can you actually pull versus what you hope to do? And I think Matt was really helpful to me to think through, right, how do we create communications that are both scaffolding and thematic, but also take the time to think kind of in a yearly basis, right? This is what our communication could look like in terms of themes, and start weaving the themes together, right, to have at least a core base of communications that are connected to the theme that we know we can execute, right, effectively and well. And then from those communications, then we can either edit, depending what's going on live in the moment, or also add some new communications. But we need to have like core content of things that are going out to the community to be able to map out what does this look like for us. So one of the ways for that for us, and you can kind of start seeing this in the website, is that every month, right, towards the first Monday of the month, I send a particular a short message to our alums, right? And this is given that most of our alums are religious professionals, right? So this includes a blessing and part of a short reflection. That reflection, though, is connected then to a larger piece in our website, right? So folks would see some of that reflection that is unique, right, to the student, to the audience, right? So it has a blessing or a short prayer meditation unique for the alumni audience that is internal via email, that is connected then to a larger piece, right, in our website that is a longer reflection. Then from there, then we can move on and take pieces to other communications, to our supporters and donors and social media. But for us, that have become part of the core of the communication, so we can stream that piece. Then I think my social media presence in Facebook then become the more kind of think pieces, having the space in which I can do those, the kind of more personal, what I'm doing, what I'm eating. Apparently, that's really of interest when I go to a new city or who I'm hanging out with, right? That is part of the Instagram world, right? And I think understanding what different media do and channels do has been important for this. And quite frankly, I have seen it, right? If I share, let's say, a thought in Instagram, I might get some might get some shares. If I say I'm visiting this particular institution, this is the great coffee shop, and I love this coffee, right? That start going, right, and generates traffic. So I think it's learning what the strategy is, and it is part of the world, right? Folks want to know.
So Elias, what about the positive effects that you're seeing when you actually see humans of all this activity? And I can say, like, out of our experience with the donor participation project, it has opened doors and it all starts really interesting conversations that lead to good places. So what have you found is the offspring of all of this?
Yeah, this might sound a little odd, maybe, or it might be a generational differences. But what I'm understanding is that there's a particular kind of, let's say, there's a number of folks that I interacted regularly in social media, right? That when we get to meet finally face to face, right, it is as if we know each other. It's like, right. So we have the familiarity. You don't have the awkwardness dancing around. We just hit the ground running in very unique ways. And I think for me, that's been kind of the joy and the surprise, right? That it's not awkward, it's not weird, right? We kind of already have a base to build out. The other thing that I'm finding out in some of the conversations has been the opportunities to then more fully engage aspects that otherwise I would not normally do. And for folks, like, I am primarily, my background is as an academic, right, who's now doing fundraising, and which I'm actually love and have a lot of fun doing fundraising.
We're going to talk about the fun in a moment. Yeah, let's
we will.
hold on to that idea.
But I think part of my work is also being an academic, and it's like, how do I get to think thoughts that are not related to my office work or development pieces and the like? And doing some of the social media work then has opened some of those channels, right, to have that broader communication.
It's like the working in public type of concept, right?
Yeah, and for example, I was recently, last year, I was invited to the University of Chicago to have a conversation around interfaith, the future of interfaith education in theological schools. Then over the summer, I was able to speak to the Association of Theological Librarians, right, about thinking libraries into the future, for example. So those were two discrete interventions that came because of some other social media kind of presence, and how folks thought of what I'm sharing and invite me into that space. And for me, then that allows me to kind of, dust my library again and think about, logical arguments and do the research, and it keep me fresh, because what I'm realizing that because of my preparation, one of the uniqueness that I can offer is how do I move my skills as a scholar, right, into the work that we do, right? There's a lot of education that happen in development of fundraising and this stuff. There's also a lot of, I process a lot of information very quickly. And it's like, well, how do I share what I'm learning, right, to my community and my alums, because they might not have the time, right, to work through these things in the same way that I have, because I need to, right? And I think that's part of the switch that I see happening. Like, we've been talking about this in other contexts. What does it mean that the world is changing, right, on you, and you still need the money, you still need to fundraise? So many of us spend hours a day looking at the threads, thinking through this, talking to folks, and it's like, well, I can digest that to my community, right, who doesn't have the same network, the same opportunity, and I see that then as a service to my community, right? That is, this is what I'm starting to do is that this is what I'm learning, right, as I'm doing X, Y, and Z. Which, like, I'm happy to talk more about this if it's useful to you. Let's set up a conversation, right? And I'm finding value of doing that work because then it builds trust, right, back into the system. That I'm not going just for the ask because I need something, but I'm also willing to be a partner in thought, right, in this work. And I think that's been one of the unintended consequences, right, of being more public. But I would say a challenge is that there's a lot out there, right? The internet highway is vast, and kind of making decisions of who to follow, how to interact, and timeliness is important.
Timeliness, exactly, right? There is a, what would you, how do you see your model of leadership extending to other scholars? Like, would you think this should apply to everybody? Should it just apply to department heads and university presidents? Should every professor be more out there? What are your thoughts about that?
Actually, two things that I want to say to that, and they're a little bit disconnected from one another, but I think they're important. After starting my job, my current position, the first call that I made was to my former dean, Dr. Javier Vieira, who's now the president of Garrett Evangelical School, Theological School here in Chicago. And I really said, I'm really sorry, you have no idea some of the things that go behind the scenes, right, of higher ed administration. And if I have known some of these things, right, I would have behaved differently as a faculty member, right? Because it's different questions, right, are framed differently that I think oftentimes we don't hear as faculty members, some of those pieces. And I think they would inform our understanding of the institution and where we are, the health of the institution, mortality, what can be or not done differently, if we have some of those conversations more transparently. So I think I'm starting to build a culture in which we can have some of these conversations more openly, because when we have to make decisions, they don't come either out of the blue, right? They're not surprises, and we have all been invested in shaping what a decision looks like for our community. And I think that is important. But I think for the faculty, one of the interesting things that is changing is publishing and how publishing works, right? Academics is perish or die in some ways, publish or perish, I should say. However, there's a particular ways that I think now folks are also starting to ask publishing houses, asking about your own ability to promote your own work, right? There's a question about how many followers, what is your footprint, right, in the social media, because that creates part of relevance of your work, but also the engagement. And I would say somebody like Dr. Anthea Butler from Penn State is a great example of a scholar who is a high rate historian who also have a really robust and large following in social media, right? And she's mostly engaged in Twitter, right? But those interventions, right, are connected to her work, right? And I think that's becoming more and more common. I also see that one of the big changes for institutions is how do you kind of balance, right? What does an academic contribution looks like for a broader public versus a piece? And here's the ugly truth, I think, for me. I co-edited a number of volumes, and every so often you get a letter from the editor about how many units I've sold, right? And oftentimes the units are sold are 200, 300. Very few academic work go to the tens of thousands, very few. Those are mostly in libraries. A social media post can go viral, right? And you reach an audience of thousands very quickly. So it's like, how do you balance, right, that impact of something that maybe 100 people in your field will read and interact with, but has a particular kind of weight, versus, right, somebody who's tracking in the larger conversation in social media, right, or open eds and the like. So I think we are in that process of understanding what impact looks like and influence as well. That I think will transform, right, a lot of the work that we do in the academy.
Well, I mean, definitely, and I think we've seen, like with COVID, that there is a I don't want to say need because it sounds prescriptive, but it would have been nice to have more scientists out there with a built-up presence, with capacity to respond to comments, not just kind of slap a link to their research and say, that's the law. You have to believe me. I'm science. Goodbye.
Right.
So there are kind of lots of positive effects of this.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, I would say in my own field, right, in sociology of religion, rituals are important, right, to the work that I analyze and study. One of the things that my community was grateful to, and I also heard from a social worker in a different context that actually used it, is that I created a short compendium of daily rituals, right? And they were really just grounding practices that we do. For me, like, how do you wash the dishes and change the intention about what you're doing? Because you will be washing dishes all the time during pandemic in your home, right? And how to make that a grounding experience, right, for folks, a meditation of sorts. And I did 12 of those in different contexts, right? And I kind of packaged them together as a letter, right, and send it to my community. I also posted some of that in social media because I did it as a kind of weekly reflection, and a social work program picked it up, right, as a way to talk to the students, as how do you keep grounded, right, in the kind of work that you are doing in a time in which your patient's life and your case's lives are up in upheaval, and yours are as well, right? So how do we create that balance? And I think that was something that happened first internally in a kind of its own, but I think doing those kind of public interventions are really important. We just have not considered them before in the same way.
Exactly. Elias, I have to say, speaking with you, I mean, that I feel so clearly that this is the way things need to go. I do hope that the excitement comes across, and to anybody who listens to this. This is so amazing. What do you see as the future? What's your mid and long-term view of? So you're on a path. You're taking your values. You're taking your institution values. You're sharing them. You're engaging in conversation, and it looks like you're making it all work. Where does this lead you? What is the outcome, that positive, we hope, of all of this?
Oh my goodness. There's a few things that I can say, right? I think there's the more practical pieces, right? And I'm thinking connecting, right, the sustainability of the school, right, to fundraising. And I heard somebody say it not long ago, right? More mission, more money, right? More money, more mission, right? So we need to figure out how to be able to do that for the sustainability of the school. I also think for my particular case, right, it's a matter of what I'm talking to my community as a matter of equity, right, and justice. And it's like, how do we create a future that is sustainable financially and that we can thrive, that is not predicated solely or primarily about higher kind of student enrollment because we need more money, right? And I think, of course, we need more students and we want to grow as a school, but I don't want the growth to be solely predicated upon or primarily predicated upon we need to pay the bills, right? So the stewardship question, right, for me is important as a matter of justice, right, to the community. And the way that I've been thinking about my community, and I'm thinking my denomination affiliation, right, and our donors and supporters and friends, and it's like, well, we are stewards, right, of a tradition that we think it matters. So if it matters to us, how do we prepare the next generation, right, of folks who will be passionate about this tradition as we are, or it can be passionate about the work that we do, right, as we are, and how do we create sustainable futures for them, right? So that what are the barriers of access that we can remove, right? Whether it is that we don't have, for my school, for example, we didn't have good alternative entry points into our school that was not connected to a full degree, right? Either a master, either an 18-month master or a 3-year master's. And it's like, well, we can do this a bit different. Can we create certificate programs? Can we create a continuing aid, right, that allows folks to come in particular ways into the school without the larger commitment of 18 months or 3 years? So we are launching an Institute of Lifelong Learning next fall, where we are building it now. We hired a director and we are in the process of building it. But for me, that was important, right? Thinking about that barrier of access into the school. But it also means a barrier of access of who of our donors or possible donors we were not connecting with because of how we were thinking of treating our donors, right? And I think that's been also a big shift, right? Our development has been around really folks who can contribute to capital campaigns, right, and main fundings, but we have not developed that kind of monthly givers, right, or as robust annual fund program. And I think that's what we're turning to understand that there is we are entering a process, a time, as I think most of us know, there's going to be a big transference of wealth, right, from folks who are moving into planned giving, and that's happening in the next 5 to 8 years. But that also means that we have to cultivate who will be in 20 years from now that replacement, right? And those are folks who are now thinking about entry-level gifts, right, or monthly supports, who are more likely, and we know from the recent trends, folks are more likely to give monthly in smaller categories and become connected than be connected into larger gifts. So I think that's part of the trick of how do we balance, right, the major giving operation that we need, in addition to connecting other folks. And for me, like, mission is important, right, to that work and engagement.
Okay, so I'm hearing, let me distill a little bit of this, because I'm hearing a lot of where you're going has kind of a higher proportion of operational challenges than typical. So going into smaller gifts, but more gifts, going into communicating more on more platforms. You know, how, and you mentioned in our pre-show talk, you mentioned, well, we're trying to do engagement and community building, but also in a way that's efficient. If I'm the primary builder in one-on-one relationships, it's going to be hard to do that sustainably, right?
Right.
You know, how are you trying to tackle all these kind of, you know, life is getting more complicated, not less. I guess from a staff perspective, from a morale's perspective, and even from a technical perspective.
Yeah. Yes. No, all those things are true, right? True.
Where the world is going, it seems.
Yes. You know, in terms of staff, I would say one of the I oftentimes tell my folks I'm honest to a fault, right? And I think that's one of the things that has been also helpful, right, for us to be really honest about the work that we need to do in our capacities, right, to take a hard look of what we need to go and what we can actually do, and balance the aspiration, right, versus the reality of what we can operationalize. I would say is also understanding for us it is easy to get discouraged, right, from the day to day, if we don't think about this is the long-term goal, right? It's going to take us really 3 to 5 years to do this, right? So how do we get the ball moving, right, so that we can get there, and having that conversation monthly, right, with our folks. It's like we do have day-to-day challenges and goals, but we're really thinking to a larger piece, right? So let's keep focus on the larger outcome. Has been helpful. I think the other piece that I realize is really essential to this work is networking, right? Who are the folks in the community that also are invested in your work and the institutional work that are willing to amplify it, right? The work that you're trying to do. And I think that's been kind of magnificent, right? To be able to connect. In our case, with a number of alums, I'm going to be in this area. Could you help us connect with folks that are passionate about your work, right? And believe in your work, that we can then communicate, right, what we're trying to do, and setting up some other spaces, right? That has been really helpful, right, to help us kind of amplify that work. And my hope is that in the near future, right, folks then develop into their own ambassadors, right, into particular kind of work. The other thing, I think for me, and I cannot say enough about this, the board, right, is also instrumental in this role, right, to mobilize their own networks, right, their own connections to get me to meet people, right, to introduce me to folks, but also make a case as advocates for the school, right. Our board members are encouraged to speak about why the school matters to them, right, in their own sites, because then that can amplify, right. And one of the things that we are actually working is in that kind of media strategy. Can we provide a kit, right, to our board members so they can use and communicate within their networks? And if they tag us into it, right, then we can amplify that work and connect to others more effectively. And I think you know, it's ambitious, and I think it is not easy, and at times it's kind of so easy to get lost in the weeds. But I'm finding that there's a particular kind of traction and light in who's being more responsive or not, right? Because they're seeing you more often, they're hearing from you. I would say that our response rate is kind of been increasing, right, as folks are kind of paying attention to who we are. And
interesting.
building relationship. At least, folks picking up the phone call, right? I would say one of the intriguing things for me, I am an inveterate texter. I love to text. I love to make random calls just to see how folks are doing. I would say within my system, that's been a bit of a surprise at times, right? It's like, why are you calling? What do you need? It's like, no, I'm just checking on you. I've been thinking of you, and I'm just letting you know, nothing else. And I think, and I actually mean that, right? That's the way that I operate. I think of you, I give you a text or send you an email, give you a call. I think what that is allowing us to do is be more genuine with one another, right? About the relationships and the challenges. I think folks have been more candid, right? About what is the trust that the institution needs to build, right? With the community or their pockets. And then we can have those conversations, right? But without having that open access, kind of in terms of communication, I think it would have been a lot harder.
Yeah, wonderful. So kind of finding the influencers in your community so that you can also develop leaders that serve as your ambassadors, and then being authentic. So let's get to the fun part. So you're inherently social person, and you like sharing that and keeping tabs on others. Thinking about job requirements, right? Is this is that you think a requirement for the job or not necessarily?
Oh my goodness! In some ways, I think at different levels, yes.
Okay.
And I'm not saying that you can. I'm a full-blown extrovert, right? So I will never not be that. But I also think you can do this work as an introvert as well. And what I meant to say is, I think there's a requirement for us to understand what is our public persona, right, in our networking persona, and really maximize what does that look like for us in the work that we're trying to do, right? So it can be the case that folks are more effective in more intimate settings, right?
Great.
So just be sure, right, to have those really deep conversations and have, one or two stump speeches prepared that you can do publicly to a larger group, but also maybe connect with somebody else within the staff, right? That can be some of that more public persona, right? And I think for me, for example, because I'm an extrovert, I can very easily, if I'm in a social context and I'm speaking and I'm moving around, I can very easily lose track of time. My time tracking is really personal and in the moment. And then I need somebody to kind of bring me in. And it's like, and actually for me, oftentimes what does look like is somebody to send me to bed. It's like, go to bed, you got to rest, right? Or, take some time to decompress, right? Because I keep going.
I can relate to that. Elias, how can people, if people want to hear more or get connected with you or start a conversation with you, what is the best way? Is LinkedIn the best way? You mentioned Facebook. I just like to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think two ways. LinkedIn is a great way to connect with me, and also my institutional email, that is eortega@meadville.edu. I think those are the two best ways to connect with me. And I'm happy to make this space and be in conversation with folks.
Thanks so much, Elias. So this has been absolutely great. I think we've learned so much, and I look forward to kind of distilling a little bit of the learnings here and in further posts. But I just wanted to thank you for sharing all of this. I think you're on an incredible path, and I hope to be able to tag along for a small part of that. Thanks so much, Elias.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your work. It's been for me an inspiration. I'm learning a lot from what you do with the Donor Search Project and the folks participating.
We're learning from each other. It's a journey. Take care. Thanks so much.
Thank you.